Recently, amidst the trade war, many people have been feeling anxious and often come to ask me whether they should exchange their money into US dollars or convert their US dollars into euros or Japanese yen. In fact, the key lies in your own needs, economic situation, and especially your risk tolerance. You should make your own decisions in everything and act with great caution. Don't just blindly believe what others say. Since people have asked me about this, I think I should share my own views. Whether they are right or wrong, they are just for your reference. As you know, I have been quite critical of Trump's initiation of a global trade war recently. I believe he is undermining the century-old foundation of the United States, and there is a high possibility that he will cause the US dollar to lose its hegemonic status. I am particularly worried that Trump might trigger a situation where the US economy experiences a triple blow to stocks, bonds, and the exchange rate. Recently, the entire market has been concerned that Trump is very likely to cause a significant depreciation of the US dollar to reduce the pressure of US debt. As a result, a large amount of capital has started flowing into the euro, the Japanese yen, and German bonds. So, at this moment, as the other side in this war, what choices should ordinary Chinese people make? Should we allocate our assets in US dollars, euros, Japanese yen, or gold? First of all, I'd like to put forward a viewpoint. The Chinese yuan is moving towards a path of printing money to deal with debts, that is, transforming the debt crisis into a currency crisis. So, as long as you don't hold to many yuan-denominated assets, you can choose any other option. Before discussing which currency to hold, let me first introduce some economic principles. Firstly, all economic and social behaviors in human society are inevitably related to individuals. Secondly, everyone's behavior is aimed at self-satisfaction, and everyone is self-centered. Thirdly, voluntary transactions based on private property are the key to creating value. For example, if you have a mobile phone in your hand, it has no value if it can't be exchanged. It only creates value when it is exchanged for food, a computer, or other items. Therefore, people are more willing to exchange their surplus items for something that is easy to trade, such as a certain currency. Yes, the purpose of our foreign exchange conversion is to obtain some currencies that are easy to exchange and less likely to depreciate. Now, let's talk about whether we should allocate our assets in US dollars, euros, Japanese yen, or gold. In the context of the trade war, regardless of how China-US relations and China-EU relations develop in the future, China's trade surplus will definitely decrease substantially. So, it is highly likely that the restrictions on converting yuan into foreign currencies will be tightened. With the shrinking of the trade surplus in the future, the convenient foreign exchange purchase quota for ordinary people is likely to be severely restricted or even become a mere formality. Therefore, if you have the need, it is advisable to exchange your money now. Anyway, for individuals, it is definitely easier to exchange foreign currencies back into yuan, and there is no need for approval, right? So, how should we choose between exchanging currency and buying gold? Personally, I think it is better to choose to exchange currency. After all, hedging with gold is something that large capital investors and central banks do. Moreover, the liquidity of physical gold is relatively poor, and it also comes with risks. In critical situations, gold can indeed be exchanged for certain supplies, but it may also bring risks to you. For example, in the event of a large-scale economic tension, I won't elaborate further, if you carry a large amount of gold with you, don't you think you will be targeted by criminals? Of course, a small amount of gold is necessary. For example, it is advisable to keep dozens or hundreds of grams of gold at home for emergency use. But there is no need to hold a large amount. After exchanging currency, you shouldn't deposit the money in domestic banks. As the saying goes, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. And it's also not a good idea to put several baskets on one cart. If you have the means, it is recommended to disperse a portion of your yuan into different currencies and deposit them in several different countries and regions around the world. It is advisable to choose countries under the common law system because these countries have more complete protection for private wealth. Of course, if you are wealthy, have the conditions and the need, you can consider setting up an offshore family trust overseas or entrusting your assets to an overseas insurance company. Under normal circumstances, the separation of the asset holder can withstand a certain amount of risk. So, should we exchange our money into US dollars, euros, or Japanese yen? It depends on your personal needs and preferences. First of all, we need to understand a basic truth. Buying foreign exchange means that you may face exchange rate risks. If you buy US dollars, euros, or Japanese yen when the exchange rate of your domestic currency against these currencies is falling, and then the exchange rate rebounds, you may lose part of your investment. However, if you consider the inflation rate and the currency depreciation rate in your own country, holding foreign currency is likely to bring more benefits than holding your domestic currency. At this time, you also need to consider the interest rate. If the interest rate abroad is higher than that at home, you may obtain higher returns. But in any case, any decision should be based on your own prediction of the future economic situation, your risk tolerance, and your personal financial goals. Specifically regarding US dollars, euros, and Japanese yen, personally, I think that despite Trump's actions, which may lead the United States into a recession and even a weak US dollar cycle, it is still very necessary for ordinary people to allocate a certain amount of US dollars. After all, the US dollar is recognized worldwide, while the euro and the Japanese yen are not as widely recognized, and let alone the Chinese yuan. And for ordinary people, the most you may have is only tens of thousands, or at most 100,000 or 200,000 US dollars. Even if you suffer losses, how significant could they be? Compared with the possible currency depreciation or inflation, don't you think you need to pay a certain price? What about the euro and the Japanese yen? Since Trump took office, his series of reckless actions have completely squandered the reputation that the United States had built up since World War II. This has presented an opportunity for Europe to rise again. Coupled with the Russia-Ukraine war, Europe now has to learn to defend itself. As a result, there is a possibility that Europe will restart its military industry. In particular, Trump is currently cutting the funding for universities and research institutions. Such actions are very likely to lead to a large influx of capital and technology into Europe, which is indeed an opportunity for the continent. Regarding the Japanese yen, Trump's current chaotic actions have increased the uncertainty in the global market. Investors are seeking safe haven assets, and the Japanese yen has become a safe haven currency due to its low interest rate. The exchange rate of the US dollar against the Japanese yen has now broken through the 140 mark, reflecting the market's preference for the yen. The yen has appreciated by 7% recently, reaching its highest level since September last year. However, I still don't have a positive outlook on the euro and the Japanese yen. They are not on the same level as the US dollar. I can understand the recent depreciation of the US dollar. Trump wants to narrow the trade deficit, and a weak dollar is one of his strategies. I can also understand why the Chinese yuan is depreciating. In order to cope with the trade war, currency depreciation can boost exports. But I still don't quite agree with the current depreciation of the Chinese yuan. So, why are the euro and the Japanese yen appreciating? Don't tell me that it's because their economies are doing well. That's just nonsense. These two economies are highly dependent on exports. The appreciation of the euro and the Japanese yen is actually harming their exports and pushing their economies further into the abyss. It's reminiscent of the Plaza Accord in the 1980s, except that this time, in addition to the Japanese yen, the euro is also involved. Let me elaborate a bit on the Plaza Accord. In 1985, the United States forced Japan to sign the agreement because Japanese products were too competitive in the international market, and the United States couldn't compete with them. By forcing the yen to appreciate and the US dollar to depreciate relatively, the competitiveness of US products in the market was enhanced. After Japan signed the Plaza Accord, its economic bubble burst. The continuous appreciation of the yen led to a large influx of international capital. In the following years, Japan's real estate and stock markets soared. Finally, in 1990, the bubble burst and Japan's economy entered a lost 30 years. So, in this trade war, Japan can be said to have no choice but to cooperate with the United States. Europe, on the other hand, has options and doesn't need to sacrifice itself to appease the United States. There are many strange things happening in this tariff war. In my opinion, the price of gold is likely to rise further. So, can ordinary people hold a certain amount of euros and Japanese yen now? Of course, They can. As I mentioned earlier, the Chinese yuan is under great pressure to depreciate. To address the issue of overcapacity, depreciation is necessary to increase exports, prevent domestic capital from flowing out, and maintain foreign exchange reserves. There will also be pressure from future foreign exchange controls and imported inflation. As a result, there is a trend of deflation in the domestic market, and interest rates will gradually approach zero, or even follow Japan's example and become negative. In this case, money in the domestic market will gradually become more valuable, and domestic capital will find it unprofitable, which may lead to capital outflows and further depreciation of the exchange rate. However, this is not absolute. For example, in the case of domestic guarantee for foreign debt, banks that provided guarantees for companies like Evergrande and Country Garden may use the savings of ordinary people to repay foreign debts, which may cause the yuan to appreciate. But this is likely to be a short-term phenomenon. In general, under the huge pressure of depreciation, holding the Chinese yuan is quite unwise. In other words, it is okay to hold some euros and Japanese yen, but the main currency to hold should still be the US dollar. After all, Trump can only cause trouble for at most for years. Even in 20 years, the euro and the Japanese yen won't be able to match the status of the US dollar. I'm also worried that in the future, China may introduce another currency, such as the digital yuan. Nominally, the digital yuan is pegged to the Chinese yuan at a 1-to-1 exchange rate, but in fact, they are not really related. When calculating GDP, the Chinese yuan is used, and when announcing foreign exchange rates to show currency stability, the Chinese yuan is also used. The digital currency is what ordinary people use in the market, and in a sense, it is more like a voucher. In this situation, if most of your assets are in US dollars, euros, or Japanese yen, your financial situation will definitely be better than others, and you will also be able to exchange for more goods. After living in China for so many years, I've realized a truth. As long as you don't expect good things to come to you easily and understand that you need to make unremitting efforts to achieve something, you can plan your life well. Don't think about so-called trends, don't focus on the appreciation and preservation of your property, and don't dream of success or becoming superior to others. Then you can live a stable life. So, for most people in this era, instead of worrying about the depreciation of the Chinese yuan, it's better to focus on earning the highest possible income in your current job to solve practical problems. Human anxiety often makes you think about meaningless things, and human greed often prompts you to make hasty investments. In fact, as long as you do your current job well and maintain a certain cash flow, that's the right way to survive. As for whether to exchange for US dollars, euros, Japanese yen, or gold, these are issues that you can only consider when you have spare money. In recent years, the asset prices of most of China's middle class have been falling, some people's incomes have decreased, and some have even lost their jobs. At this moment, our most urgent concern should be survival, not whether to exchange for US dollars, euros, Japanese yen, or gold. Well, guys, that's all for today's topic. Goodbye.